Afternoon, everyone. We have quorum. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Other individuals and the media may be audibly and or visually recording this meeting. As well, a reminder that all electric devices need to be switched to a non-audible function. Clerk Angela, are there any changes to the agenda?
No, Madam Chair, there are no changes to the agenda.
We need an e-vote to approve the agenda as presented. May I have a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Ferguson and seconded by Councillor Pierson. All in favor or opposed? Thank you, that carries. Declarations of interest. Dear members, are there any declarations? Hearing none.
I'm single. Does that make me in
I'm going to scoot on by that one. Approval of the minutes. We require an electronic vote to approve the minutes of the November 26th meeting as presented. Moved by Councillor Clark and seconded by Councillor Pierson. All those in favor or opposed? That carries. Thank you, members. Delegation request. We require an e-vote to approve the delegation request for today's meeting. May I have a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Ferguson and seconded by Councillor Pierson. All those in favor, please. Yea or nay? Wonderful, that is approved. I would like to call upon Tim Simmons respecting heritage weddings and coordinators. Report item 19012A, civil marriage solemnization. Hi, Tim. Good afternoon. Just a reminder to you, all delegates, including yourself, have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. Thank you for allowing me to make this short presentation to express my fear of allowing the city clerk to perform marriages in council chambers. I'm sure you've all read my letter, so at this time I'll just present an abbreviated version with my main points. I am the owner-operator of Heritage Weddings and Coordinators, formerly the Hess Village Wedding Chapel. We have been performing affordable wedding ceremonies, commitment ceremonies, renewal of vows, and child dedications to all couples since 1980. It is a second-generation family business. My late father, Ted Simmons, a former clergyman, worked in provincial court here in Hamilton as a probation and parole officer. During the 1970s, he saw couples coming to court in white wedding dresses and suits and leaving a few minutes later looking shocked and underwhelmed by the whole experience of being married in civil court. That was when he decided to open the Hess Village Wedding Chapel. City Hall and churches were not providing civil ceremonies, and he and my mother put their modest savings together and opened Hamilton's first wedding chapel to provide wedding services to everyone. 40 years later, we still provide small, private, dignified wedding ceremonies for all couples 7 days a week, any day, any night, at our chapel located at 100 Main Street East, which is just a few blocks from City Hall. We provide a better service at a more affordable price than what your report proposes to do. However, we are concerned that since City Hall issues marriage licenses, couples will feel compelled to use City Hall marriage services, especially couples who are new to Canada and do not fully understand the choices available to them. They will become a captive market. The report mentions that people have asked the city clerk why they cannot be married at City Hall. This question never used to be asked when the city clerk's office gave couples a list of available wedding officiants in Hamilton, along with their purchased marriage license. However, the city clerk stopped this practice approximately a decade ago. Since then, couples have been on their own to find an officiant to marry them. We all know that part of this committee's mandate is to ensure equity of service within Hamilton. I suggest that you return to the list, virtual or otherwise, and allow all companies and individuals providing wedding officiant services in Hamilton to be on the list. This will support local providers as well as associated spin-off businesses. In 2004, the intent of Regulation 28504 was not for municipalities to use city council space to create an enterprise for a service that is already being provided in an affordable and equitable way. It was created so that marriages could be performed in remote places where wedding services were either sparse or non-existent. The purpose was to create more equity within such a large and diverse province as Ontario. If council approves this direction, you will not become competition to the larger, wealthier wedding venues. You'll be competing with retired ministers and sole proprietors. Many wedding officiants are retired clergy on CPP or OAS. They need extra income to live independently. We look out for each other as a family might. I have one minister who uses his extra income from performing weddings to visit his grandchildren once or twice a year. Some have lived in housing like First Place. Some are volunteer nurses, and all do something to help people in crisis at home or abroad. Hamilton is a city that already provides wedding services at an affordable price to all couples seeking the marriage bonds. Prices are not inflated, and there is no lack of people ready to provide this service. If you compete in this manner, not everyone will survive, and some will just walk away. In the long run, you could create more inequity while reducing the overall quality of service. What you are proposing is a significant market shift that will put our livelihoods in jeopardy. The report you have is heavy on what municipalities are providing, as though each jurisdiction is a fair comparison in this area. Hamilton is a unique market, unlike most other cities in this region. We are a wedding destination. It is being the citizens of Hamilton that have built this affordable wedding industry for over 4 decades. And in some part, City Hall was also part of that build by providing couples an exhaustive list of affordable marriage services available in Hamilton. So I ask, even if you move forward with providing marriages here in council chambers, will you also provide couples with information for the many other affordable options in the city? With Valentine's Day approaching, I suggest that for those of you who are married, when you go home this evening, have a look at your wedding photos. I'm sure they are much nicer than your memories, and your memories are much fonder than if you had your wedding here instead. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and welcome, Tim. What do you charge to do a wedding?
Well, our prices range from $250 to some larger weddings that we do, which will, with HST, would probably come close to $2,000. The majority of weddings we do down here on Main Street will range from $250 to $400, depending on the number of guests and how many extras you might want to do with it.
Okay, I guess did you see the report where we're going to charge, I think it's 300 and...
Yeah, 300 plus tax, I think.
320, I can find it here in just a second. But it sounds like it's more affordable to go to your firm rather than to come to City Hall. I guess the only trouble I'm having with this, we're required to allow the public to have freedom of choice. And Hollywood plays up getting married at City Hall all the time. And so we've been turning people away at that. And, maybe, for whatever personal reasons they have, they want to come here and go to the 8th floor and go into a boardroom and have our clerk perform the ceremony. And so to use the argument that we're going to compete against you is the same, we notarize documents for the public here. And there's lots of lawyers that do that and charge a fee for it, as we do. Should we not build any more soccer fields because there's some private soccer fields, or build any more arenas because there's some private arenas? And so that's the balance. My personal issue is that I like to give freedom of choice to the public. Let them go where they want to go. And you need to market yourself to explain it's more affordable and the experience is better. And you shouldn't have any trouble competing with us because we're higher in price. And it's just a boardroom that is the setting.
Yeah.
And so I have trouble with the argument that you want us to not compete, because we do it in a lot of things for the private sector, and allowing the public to have the freedom of choice, go where they want to go, and let them pick.
Please.
So I'm not asking that you don't do it. I'm just saying that since you have somewhat of a captured audience here with the marriage licenses, I don't know if you're going to be advertising in the hall or those kinds of things. They have to come here anyways. That you might return to the list you, City Hall once gave out to people getting married of all the options they have in the city.
No, I don't think we're gonna go out and put an advertising campaign together. I don't even anticipate having signs here, although I'll ask staff that after we receive your delegation, but I don't think that's our intent. It's another option available to the public if they want to use it. And it is a little bit of a revenue generator for the city also, and we're having our challenges with budgets right now too, so. Thank you for coming in today.
Councillor Pierson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Tim, for your presentation. So my question was, and I appreciate that you mentioned you're just down the street, but you do weddings also on the weekends, correct?
Yes, we do. We do weddings all year round. Most of our weddings, or a good about two-thirds of our weddings are done down the street. And then we do larger areas. A lot of public parks will rent, Thunder and Castle sometimes, and we'll do the larger weddings. But in the off-season, wedding industry, the season is really May to October. And in the off-season, we rely on our little chapel especially because that's where just about all of our weddings are taking place at that point. So it supports our staff and our students in the off-season when we're not so busy.
Understood. So, and I don't believe that, and we'll ask the questions after, but I don't really believe reading the report we're going to be offering any weekend weddings. And it's just going to be a basic, I think when we had the initial report, there will be no decorations, there'll be nothing. It's a basic. So, I don't feel that it's a competition, and I will ask the question to staff of, publicizing, but I know I was just at the wedding show a few weeks ago, and I did speak to an officiant, and asked, made them aware of this coming forward and whether they had any issues. And they said, no, they felt they were busy enough with the geographical area that they cover. That the majority of them were busy enough, because I did ask the question. I thought, well, let me find out. My daughter is getting married, so.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. So I did ask that, but I will ask the question of staff afterwards as well. Thank you, sir.
I appreciate that, and that makes me feel more comfortable as well, that that's how you're presenting it.
Thank you very much, Tim. I don't have any other speakers on the docket for you. Thank you for your
Thank you so
delegation.
much.
Motion to receive, moved by Councillor Ferguson. Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Pierson. Thank you. Carried. Next, we're going to go to the report itself, which is 10.1 on the civil marriage solemnization, and staff are in attendance to answer any questions. And I do know Councillor Pierson has already noted that she has some questions. So.
Chair and through to staff, thank you again. Did read the report back again, read through it again, and I did ask the question of officiants at the wedding show a couple weeks ago. So just as Tim has raised today, though, the listing, and I'm not sure that I'm saying I'm comfortable in providing a list out there because it's a business and the list is available. You can Google online and all the wedding officiants come up online. But my question is, we are only anticipating any requests will be during regular business hours in the city building, correct?
Clerk Holland?
Through the chair. So initially, for the first year, yes, we are looking at regular business hours. It is not our intention to have people working after hours.
Thank you.
If anything comes up, we'll definitely evaluate it to see if we can accommodate. And I do also want to highlight in the report that's different from the report that came to you in the fall, with further investigation that we did, because we didn't outline it in the initial report, we are only offering civil marriage ceremonies.
Correct.
Ceremonies outside of that, delivered by ministers or people of clergy, they are providing a religious ceremony. They are registered with the government, with the Ontario government, to deliver a religious ceremony. We are doing civil only. That is all we're permitted to do under the Act.
And I'm glad you caught that, because I was going to ask that, because as Mr. Simmons mentioned, he could have weddings that could have up to 200 people at it. That's not what we're anticipating being here, because it's just a basic civil wedding.
Correct. So our service is different in what other people would be offering. Theirs is religious in nature. If you go to Service Ontario website, they list all of the registered religious officiants with the government to deliver, with the Ontario government to perform marriage ceremonies. We're just doing a civil ceremony. That's what the clerk, judges, and justice of the peace are permitted under the Act to do civil only.
Exactly. Thank you for that answer. And I didn't read it, though, because I just picked up the marriage application. There is a form that's put out by the province, and does it have that informational link for someone to go on to find out the locations for civil ceremonies throughout Ontario?
Through the chair. So currently, when people come to the counter and they're asking who can perform ceremonies, we direct them to the Service Ontario site. They are the ones who keep that list up to date for everybody.
Thank you, and I hope Mr. Simmons is hearing that. Thank you for those answers.
Councillor Clark.
So we don't provide a list of officiants in the Hamilton area.
No, to my knowledge, that's not something we've done. The list is kept up to date on the Service Ontario website.
And so Mr. Simmons, Madam Chair, indicated that about 10 years ago, we used to provide a list of officiants from the local area.
Through the chair, I don't have any knowledge of that. Every single person who is registered as a religious officiant is on Service Ontario. And that list changes as people move or they go to different areas of the different cities, but you have to register yourself. So a religious officiant can register themselves in multiple cities.
And so we provide them the link to that site when they come in to get their application?
We don't provide them a link. We tell them to go to Service Ontario. It's on the Service Ontario website.
So do we provide them any documentation when they leave?
Just their marriage license application, or the license.
And so help me understand then, you're saying that all of the officiants that are listed with the Provincial Service Ontario are religious in nature?
Through the chair, that is correct.
So there's no one in there that's non-denominational? Because there are
Correct.
people
It
who are
is- it has
promoting
to be-
themselves as non-denominational officiants.
Through the chair, I can't speak to how people are advertising themselves on that list. When we spoke to the Ontario General Registrar, everybody who is registered as a religious officiant has a religious connotation of some sort within their ceremony. The only people permitted under the Marriage Act to deliver a civil ceremony are a judge, a justice of the peace, and the clerk if they've been designated by council.
So what's preventing the city from providing a document that just, this is the link to the Service Ontario site. If you're looking for officiants, you'll find them there as opposed to just telling them to go to Service Ontario.
Through the chair, I'm happy to add that link to our marriage site. We do have a web page on the city's website providing information, and we do link to Service Ontario on there. We're happy to link it to the list of officiants. But what you would be asking then is that staff constantly see and update that list. There's not over 900 people who have registered, so we would have to keep going in to see if there's been any changes to make sure that the list, the hard paper that we're providing people is current. I'm happy to provide a link on our webpage.
I'm just suggesting the link, not us providing the list. So when they leave here, they're handed a document that says, go to this link, and you can see the current list of officiants.
So through the chair, we can look into that with our customer service staff,
Because that would
see what the costs would be.
clearly satisfy Mr. Simmons and officiants that we're making sure they have that list, and we're not necessarily competing. To his point about advertising, how are we going to be promoting the fact that we're doing civil ceremonies?
Through the chair, at this point, we were just going to be putting it on our marriage website.
Can I ask, Madam Chair, the last question? I was very pleased to see the number of written responses, I guess is the terminology, because we'd asked people to write and provide us their comments. Did anyone happen to calculate the numbers of pros and cons? Because when I was going through it, it looked like the vast majority of them were supportive of the decision. I only captured, I think, 2 or 3 that seemed to have concerns.
Through the chair, we don't tally it up. We leave that in,
Well, God bless you.
But I'm under the same impression that there's only 3 or 4 who were against it.
Yeah, so I didn't miss that. That was the case in point. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, I want to follow up on Councillor Clark's question. So you don't tend to put posters up in City Hall, get hitched here or something like that, or you aren't going to advertise in the Spectator or put out billboards?
Through the chair, that's not our intention, no. Our first year, we really need to measure how many requests we actually get. We only have so many hours in the day as well that we can allow staff to do this. So we're not out to do, 1,000 marriages ceremonies a year. That's not our intent. Our intent is just to provide the service as our resources allow us to. We only have a limited number of resources.
Okay, I think that'll put Tim's mind at ease a lot, knowing that we're not going to publicly advertise this. And so I think it's in the report, but nice to have it answered publicly. Is the revenue for performing these marriages will come to the taxpayers, come to the city?
Through the chair, yes, the full fee comes back as a
All my
revenue
questions,
source.
thank you.
Clerk Angela, I just need some direction because I cannot recall. I know I am the vice chair of this subcommittee. I would like to ask a question. I'm not sure who I give the chair to. Okay, Councillor Ferguson, would you mind? There you go. Thank you. Clerk Holland, I just want to make sure, it sparked my curiosity from the line of questioning from Councillor Clark. I really did not appreciate that which is set out on page 2 of your report, and I'm looking at paragraph 2. You have made the point orally, but for anyone who's watching, the existing 920 registered religious marriage officiants in the City of Hamilton are not permitted to perform civil marriage ceremonies. I did not know that. And my question is just making sure I understand. You were asked whether we will be providing those who come to the counter a written direction or information on Service Ontario. So just so I understand, those which are listed on Service Ontario, are those these people? Just so I understand.
Through the chair, yes. So the list that we provided you within one of the appendices here of the over 900 officiants, that we pulled that from the Service Ontario website.
So my second question is, I'm not sure who you referenced you consulted with to bring this clarity to the table, but is that clarity out, in your opinion, in the Service Ontario site, that the folks that are listed there are registered religious marriage officiants?
Yes, if you go to Appendix H of the report, we have a picture of what is on the Service Ontario website, and it says the types of marriage, and it says religious marriage, recognized religious official marries, religious official marries you. Civil marriages, the City of Hamilton does not have a judge, but the types of marriages is underneath from the provincial website. Religious marriage, that's where we pulled, there's a link there for religious marriage officiants. That's where the 920 odd came from. Underneath that, you have civil marriage. It says a judge, justice of the peace, or authorized municipal clerk. And that's right from the Ontario website.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's not my job to cast any judgment on the intent or the orientation of people. For some people, it's very important that their officiant not have any religious orientation or persuasion. So I just wanted to make sure, further to Councillor Clark's point, that if we're providing that information to Service Ontario, that it's clearly set out for that user, so that they are fully aware of who is what. Do you understand?
Through the chair, yes.
I knew you understood. I just wasn't saying it in such a way that was understandable. Thank you.
I'll give the chair back to you then.
Okay, so I don't have any more questions. We need an electronic vote to approve item 10.1. May I have a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Pierson. And is it seconded by Councillor Clark or a question, sir? Councillor Ferguson is seconding. Councillor Clark, did you wish to speak?
Thank you. I'd like to add an item E that would request that the staff add a link to the Service Ontario site to our website. I'm not sure I'm wording that right because I'm being duplicative in my language, but we have our wedding site, as I understand it, from Ms. Holland, and I'd like to be able to add the link to that Service Ontario where they can find the officiants to our site. I'm not sure how to word it.
Sorry, through the chair, in Appendix H, it is there. We have a list to the website for the list of authorized officiants.
Yes, I know it's in Appendix H, but my desire is that, oh, you're saying that is already on the website?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Okay, I missed that completely. I thought that was an appendix for us to understand it. Okay, got it. Thank you. I withdraw my request for that amendment. And I just do want to say my reservations were with regards to creating competition unnecessarily in a very competitive marketplace to begin with. And I'm surprised to hear that Service Ontario only lists denominational officiants, because I recall when they made the decision to expand the number of wedding officiants across the province, that much to the chair's comment, they enabled at the time non-denominational wedding officiants. So someone can literally promote themselves as a wedding officiant with no religious affiliation at all. And I'm surprised that they're not listed anywhere in Service Ontario. And I don't know what happened from that time to now. But it is, to the chair's point, a bit of a challenge because there are many people who are secular atheists that really want no, in any way, shape, or form, religious connotation in a service. And I've attended some of those services from officiants. So I'm struck by the dichotomy of what I'm hearing about Service Ontario with what I'm seeing out in the broader community. So I just wanted to put that on the record. I'll support it the way it is as it's moving forward for the pilot, and we'll see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. So we had a mover and a seconder in Councillor Pierson and Councillor Ferguson, I believe. All those in favor or opposed, please? And that vote carries. Thank you to staff for your work on the report and your initiative. We are on to 10.2, the appointment of the City of Hamilton Integrity Commissioner and Lobbyist Register. Staff are in attendance to answer any questions about this report. Councillor Clark.
No concerns at all with the process, with the selection of principals integrity. I have worked with them for a year now. They have been very prompt, comprehensive in their responses. I really appreciate the fact that they provide advice memorandums to councillors who are requesting advice. In the past, I know the act was changed to enable it, but it was very challenging. You had to go out and hire an independent lawyer to give you that type of advice, because our city solicitor was not in the position to give independent advice to all of the councillors. So I've been very pleased with their performance overall, so I'm pleased with what's here before us. My question, though, to staff, and I'm not sure if it has to be a part of this recommendation or perhaps a separate motion altogether, I would like principal integrity to appear before us. And the reason I'd like them to appear before us, and I think it was Councillor Ferguson that brought it up, and now I'm experiencing the same thing. The Municipal Conflict of Interest Act says that the conflict is for siblings and spouse. So everything else is not a conflict. But now we're being presented from principled integrity that there is an apparent conflict under common law, whereby if a reasonable person ought to have assumed that there was a potential conflict, then one would have a conflict. So if your brother, sister, nephews, nieces, cousins are involved in a business that we're making a decision on, we have to declare that as a conflict according to principled integrity. The challenge for me in that, and I'm sorry for the long-winded explanation, is because when I read our code of conduct, it doesn't include that. So on one side, we're being advised to declare that apparent conflict under common law, and on the other side, I'm being told I have to comply with our code of conduct, and our code of conduct does not contain that. And the Municipal Act, at least from my interpretation, seems to be silent on it. So I'm really torn. And so we're being forced to, out of an abundance of caution, to declare these conflicts. I have one coming up later today. But I have not seen the substantive rationale and reason in connecting the dots as to why we would be doing this. So is it possible to invite them in here, whether or not it's to the governance committee or maybe to a general issues committee, to actually answer questions about our code of conduct and their position on apparent conflicts under common law?
Would, Clerk Holland, would you like to answer that, please?
Yeah, through the chair. So it is my intention, once we have a signed agreement with the Integrity Commissioner, that we develop a work plan. Within that work plan, what I would like them to do is, first of all, come in and do some training with all members of council. It's my plan to come to a GIC, a special GIC, so that all members can be there. I will be reaching out to all members of council ahead of time to make sure that that training is what you expect, and to make sure that they cover the topics that you are interested in learning about. Beyond that, I'm also looking at them doing a review of the code of conduct to see if there's any gaps within that, a review of our existing registry, the lobbyist registrar bylaw, and also our our code of conduct, and the lobbyist registry bylaw as well. So I'm hoping that they'll do a review of those, and then they'll come with some recommendations for council to consider. But I think the training first is very important.
And so, and I agree on that. I guess the challenge, and I support the training aspect. The challenge I have is that the training sessions under the Municipal Act are closed sessions. And some of these issues need to be explained in open session so that the public also understands what an apparent conflict under common law is. So I'm not sure how we do both, but at some point we need to be transparent as to what that process is and why councillors like around this room are experience this, and we're declaring these conflicts, abiding in full compliance. But I think it would be fair to say I'm apprehensive about it because I really don't understand why we're declaring a conflict, an apparent conflict under common law that is not consistent with our own code of conduct and does not appear to be consistent with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. And that's where I'm challenged. So my preference would be have them come before General Issues Committee so that we can actually ask those questions and get those answers in the public record so that we all understand it, and then go through a training process and review of the code of conduct. But I'll leave it to you. My comments are made, and I guess we continue on until we can resolve some of these outstanding issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Yes, I too have no problem with the recommendations that I think the current Integrity Commissioner is very accessible and does give prompt replies, and looks like they're cost competitive when I read the matrix on the costing side. And so I'm fully supportive of the recommendations before you, but I too am very confused, as Councillor Clark said, and I had the privilege of having a private meeting with the clerk about this. If you go on the Google and search Hamilton Code of Conduct for council members, it comes up. And what comes up, and I'll just read section 8.2 to you, it says, in addition to disclosing pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, members of council shall disclose non-pecuniary interest they have in a matter before them. And of course, that's very subjective. You know, one person's going to have a whole different view of what you're in conflict in versus someone else. The Municipal Conflict of Interest Act is very objective. It says you're in conflict if it's a family member Remember, our own, and I've got it in front of me, our own code of conduct defines a family member. It does not include siblings. It's parents, children, and spouses, and stops there. And so I had trouble with that because I remember George Rusty coming before committee to talk about this to us. And I was surprised that our own kind of conduct that's on the website does say you must disclose a possible, or I'm going to come back to the proper wording, but it says here a non-pecuniary interest. Because what is that? What's the definition of it? So I went down and met with the clerk, and she was good enough to pull out for me the minutes of the Thursday, April the 5th, 2018 Governance Committee report. And there is a letter from George Rusty suggesting that we delete that section because it is subjective. You know, there's a lot of political pundits out there to try to look for reasons to try to embarrass members of council or give themselves some publicity. And they would pick something for a possible conflict of interest or a non-pecuniary interest, which is very subjective. And how do we protect ourselves against that? So I thought George gave us good advice saying, get rid of that. And we did, because when we went down to clerks again and they searched up the actual code of conduct, it does say in there, but it's not the one on the website on page 10. Sections 18.2, which is the one I just read out to you, 8.3, B, C, and 8.4 were deleted as per the attachment of bylaw 18-125 on May 23rd, 2018. So George Rusty said, take it out. Clearly, council agreed. It's been removed from the bylaw. So my first concern is we got the wrong one up on the website. And if the public was going to look like I did, it says you must declare a non-pecuniary, which is different than the advice that George Rusty gave me. Where it gets really complicated again for me, and I would like the Integrity Commissioner, like Councillor Clark, to come before this committee, because I had a situation at the last GIC meeting, and it was done in camera, so I'm not going to discuss it, but I wasn't sure because it involved my nephew. And so I spoke to the Integrity Commissioner. She says, no, it does not cascade down to nephews. In fact, she says it doesn't even include siblings, so a sister or brother. But she went on to say, and she gave me a nice 4-page summary. And it says here that members of council are required to avoid apparent or perceived conflicts of interest by arranging their business affairs so it is to preclude such conflicts arising and where this is not feasible by disclosing and stepping away from participation in matters where there may be an apparent or perceived conflict. I have real trouble with that. Everybody's going to have a different view. What's a conflict of interest? And so, because it's 100% subjective. And so because of that, she gave me the advice to step away, which I did. But the Conflict of Interest Act says I didn't need to. And so what's the right decision? Now, when I questioned her on that, she says, well, I don't agree with Mr. Rusty. And now we have 2 integrity commissioners with 2 different opinions. But to put something in place where we have to live and die by a perceived conflict is not fair and not right. Because somebody may say, because I part my hair in my left side, I'm being facetious as I say this, I part my hair in the left side, I'm in a conflict on anything to do with hair. You know, and so how far does this chase you? And we sit here, members of council, I watch this. Are we in a conflict or are we not? And this is live. This happened a week ago. And so I've got the opinion of the principal's integrity in front of me saying you must declare a perceived conflict. So my first question is, did she look at the code of conduct that's on the website? Or has she got the real one that's in the clerk's notes? And so I'm not sure. I want to ask her that question if she was to come here. But there's different opinions being given. First of all, the ones on the website is wrong. And secondly, is that the one she's using to form this opinion that I may be in a conflict? And thirdly, I want to really challenge that somebody can bring a conflict of interest charge against you because they think it is, not because it factually is. You know, the family is very clearly defined in the the code of conduct, and I'll just read it out to you. Family member, this is under the definitions, means a child, parent, or spouse of the member, which term have not have the same names as given to them in the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and defines a child, a parent, and a spouse. That's how far it goes. But now they're hooking us with, well, there's a perceived conflict. And so I need clarity on this, because it's not fair to put us out in that position where we don't know. And so you're going to force us to declare conflicts where we probably don't. And I don't think that's helpful to council, because we're elected to represent our constituents, so we can't do it because we're being handcuffed with something that's subjective. So I would like them in here to the next governance committee to pose that question to, because I think council deserves clarity on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, and so further to the point, because I did make inquiries to Mr. Abrams, who is one of the co-principals. And the response that I received is that they're basing their decisions on court cases, and that it's a apparent conflict under common law. And so they're making it as though if a reasonable person who is informed could come to the determination that there was a bias or potential bias, then you should declare that conflict and not participate, which creates some really challenging determinations as to how we proceed. And so my suggestion still stands, if we could have them come to GIC to answer those questions about that issue, separate from the training and separate from changes to the code of conduct, I think it would be really helpful to everyone around the table, and certainly to the public, because I'm being asked, well, what's the conflicts on some of these things? And it's very challenging to explain. I just think it would be helpful. So I think it's a fair request, and I'll leave it to the clerk and the city solicitor to arrange.
Clerk Holland, and then Councillor Ferguson.
Through the chair, I just want to highlight to committee that the annual report from the Integrity Commissioner is coming tonight to council. And there is a recommendation, it's in the communication section, and there is a recommendation that they, because they have requested to come to the next governance committee to present their report. So you will be able to ask them questions then, but absolutely as part of their contract, they will be coming and doing training as well.
Sorry, Councillor Clark.
So then we could ask them at council, make the recommendation that they appear before General Issues Committee so that all the councillors hear it, as opposed to 5 of us.
I think there is an overwhelming interest that it would be in the interest of all of council in the form of GIC to hear the information.
Through the chair, absolutely, if you want to make that amendment this evening.
We'll watch for it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I'm sorry to take up the time, but it's been gnawing at me for a couple months now, and then I heard Councillor Ferguson raise it at the last GIC meeting, and then I bumped into the exact same thing over the weekend.
Councillor Ferguson?
So in the meantime, what does clerks recommend we do? Do we follow the Conflict of Interest Act? Or do we go beyond that to the subjective component?
Through the chair, I would advise that you take the advice of the Integrity Commissioner.
Okay, and once again, the problem I have to that, every issue that comes before council, you got to ask yourself, am I somehow, somewhere connected to this? And, I asked the Integrity Commissioner that same question. And her answer was that the Conflict of Interest Act is very outdated. And my response was, that's not my problem. We have an act that we follow. And now it's being changed because of one person's opinion, and because it puts us all at risk. There's, once again, a lot of political pundits out there looking for reasons to try to come after any member of council. And it's not a good position you're putting us in to say, all of the information that's different than what's in the Conflict of Interest Act and what's in our Code of Conduct as amended. George Rusty wrote that conflict of interest, or that conflict of interest legislation, we were told when we retained him. so was very knowledgeable to it. And now I got the opinion of two separate integrity commissioners. I know we have the current one and the former one, but help.
Thank you. I think there's been some good discussion, and I think the clerk has heard it in full and understands the direction that has been given. So moved by Councillor Clark and seconded by Councillor Pierson. Electronic vote, please, on 10.2. All in favor or opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. We're on to motions now, and I'm going to relinquish the chair to Councillor Ferguson because mine is the first motion on the docket.
Okay.
Are you there? Thank you. Thank you very much. Mine is 11.1, verbal updates at council and committee meetings. It's been referred here from a late November meeting. I'll read it just for those who might be watching this. It's very, very short. Whereas council has no record of the content of a verbal update, therefore be it resolved that staff be directed to discontinue the practice of providing verbal updates without an accompanying summary document which outlines the points covered. I'll simply speak to it thus. I think history has... Oh, we need a seconder. Thank you, Clerk Angela.
Seconder of Councillor Clark. Go ahead.
Thank you. History, we have always documented our time, typically, whether it be paintings on the inside of caves, and they provide a record of what we were doing and how we were doing it. And sometimes, as we became more sophisticated, the decisions that we made or what we were apprised of. And in the interest of transparency, I think it is important for there to be written documentation of that which was provided to us as members of council when we come together to deliberate and debate something. And specifically, I think it's in our self-interest to have that written documentation. And be more than happy to take questions on it.
Okay.
Or debate.
Councillor Clark.
No problem. I'm off again. I'm back on again. You guys just like pushing buttons, don't you? I do too. Okay, so the question, Mr. Chairman, is with regards to what was the impetus for the motion? What prompted you to realize that this was an issue?
I'm a newly elected member of council. Specifically, when I was trying to understand the history of an item, and in this case, it was the Shadok file. In my efforts to understand its history, I concluded, because I couldn't find written record of the updates that were provided and the form that were provided in, and any direction that may have been given, there wasn't any. And I understand that we are human beings and staff have a significant workload, and sometimes information comes upon us rapidly. But I do think it's important for there to be something in the written record of that information which was exchanged to an elected body.
So was this specific to an in-camera meeting then? The Shadok Creek one?
Two of them were, at least, 3 updates, and I could not find written record. To answer your question.
Okay, so my comments, Mr. Chairman. So we record our meetings, so there's a record of what is being said. And so in a public meeting, from time to time, there may be a verbal update. I'm thinking more recently, the transportation, whatever that task force is called. And I know staff have been working hard to provide written documentation for it. in my previous term, it was an issue where going in camera, we'd be receiving a verbal update, and we were told in advance of going in camera, we're going in camera because it's labor issues or this issue or that issue, but we weren't provided the documentation. And one of the challenges that I have, and I think it's ancillary to what you're saying here, is council has a real challenge legally making the determination to go in camera if they don't have any document that they can read to tell them whether or not they should be recommending to go in camera. And so do we have a policy, my question would be to the clerk or legal, do we have a policy that for going in camera, council is being provided a document previous to making the decision to go in camera so that they can be reasonably assured for themselves that they're making the right determination?
Andrea, then I'll check with Nicole too. Go ahead, Andrea.
Through the chair. So typically when my staff are preparing the agenda, when we're given a report and we're told that it's a confidential report, it will be discussed in camera. There's a discussion with the clerk staff and the report author to make sure that the content of the report does fall in line with the items under the Municipal Act to give you permission to go in camera. You can always choose not to, but is the permission under the Municipal Act if you choose to? Generally, it's been my experience that anything that's been brought forward verbal is usually very last minute information and very timely information where we need timely decision making to occur. And absolutely, we check with the message delivery, I guess because it's not the report author, but whoever's going to be delivering that message to council or committee to make sure that it does fall in line with those items under the Municipal Act. And we make sure that we work with staff to make sure that we have the proper sections under the Act highlighted so that council or committee is aware the reasonings behind going in camera.
And so the first part of your answer, I think, is bang on. We get a report, we can read the report. The recommendation is to go on camera for the following exceptions. We make the determination whether or not we agree with you, and we can make that determination. And from time to time, as you know, I've disagreed with some of those recommendations, and I challenge them, and we have the discussion. But therein lies the rub on the second part, and I think that gets to what Councillor Wilson is saying specifically to the two Shadok in-camera sessions. If there was no documentation provided as a confidential document to council indicating what is going to be discussed and providing it in a written format, and then the exceptions as to why they'd be going in camera, council is simply acquiescing the authority to the clerk and the city solicitor without determining for themselves whether it's appropriate to go in camera. And that's a problem for me. It was a problem that I had with Mr. Murray, because he did that frequently, and I objected frequently, and I thought we had moved away from that. But to hear that it occurred in the last term, it's a concern for me that we don't have a policy that council is provided an actual report, could be a one-page report, but there's a report from staff indicating what the issue is and what the recommendations are, and here's where we're going, and then the exceptions as to why we're going in camera. Because if we don't have that documentation, and we're simply relying on staff telling the clerk and the city solicitor, here's why we think we need to give them this verbal update in camera, and we have no documentation, then you're asking us to go in camera, and it's our job to make that decision under the Act without having any evidence as to why we would be going in camera. Do you see my point?
Through the chair, I absolutely see your point. I can't speak to what occurred in the previous term, but my experience since I've been here, the only verbal updates I have seen are always very last minute items. Or council is requesting an update on an item. And I don't want to speak to which items, but council may say, can I get an update on that? And if we go into closed session, yes, we can provide you with an update. So they're usually last minute things that we've done without documentation.
And so is there any reason why we can't develop a policy that basically says that if there's a verbal update, there has to be an accompanying summary document so that council can make the determination whether
through the chair, the only, my only feedback on that is if council is asking for last minute updates, we have no way of preparing that in time. A lot of these last minute updates are within the meeting.
Yes, but I'm not sure that the Shed Oak situation was that way.
I wasn't here,
I understand that.
unfortunately.
So I think there's some validity to it. I think indicating that there has to be a written record is a valid governance issue. I think it has more validity when we're dealing with in-camera matters, because we cannot make a determination to go in camera as a council if we're not being provided the information to make that determination. And it's been an issue for me from the previous term. I thought we had it resolved, and then to hear that it happened in the last term is a little bit distressing for me, because we need to make sure that on a go-forward basis, we're getting as much information as we can in written format prior to making a determination to go in camera. That would be my point, Madam Chair and Acting Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pierson.
Acting Chair. So Councillor Clark's asked, made a few points and asked what I was going to ask. So I understand in my recollections, majority of the time that we have verbal updates, they are last minute updates that come forward. And I know Madam Clerk, who's ever sitting in this chair, is very diligent in making sure that what is coming forward follows the process. So, you know, if it's not appropriate that something's been out there and now is being walked in, clerks always has the ability to tell us that's not appropriate and it has to come through the process. So I understand that, and I just want to be sure we're not tying hands, because, I mean, we'd rather have the information in a timely fashion, especially if it's, you know, something that needs a decision going forward very quickly. But I don't have a problem if they're saying we need some sort of, even a very basic report that outlines something. If it's in camera, it's going to have to be on red, and we'd have to go in camera anyways. And then out of whatever discussions that an accompanying report be done, is that basically, maybe I should be asking the mover, is that basically the intent of what you're after?
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to that question. My understanding is I appreciate that there are matters which are very time sensitive, but I think we've just had a long discussion about the intricacies and the sensitivities around conflict of interest. And I think and the reason why we have an integrity commissioner, and that which is to provide us with the best of advice and counsel so that we are not open to accusations of conflict and impropriety. And I would think the same service could be provided to all members of council if we had written documentation, which, further to Councillor Clark's point, sets out clearly and so gives us a justification as to why we did or did not seek to go in camera on that item. When we're just provided with a verbal update, and I also was not here for those early Shed Oak matters, but there were some that could have been provided in a written report format. We can't go back, we're only going forward. I just think it's in our best interest and in the interest of transparency to have some template in which the very basics can be provided.
Thank you. Now, if I still
Pierson?
have the microphone, thank you, Mr. Acting Chair. So through to the clerk then. So understanding what the request is, and if something did come forward verbally, is there some way, and I know you can't control every single department and all the issues that may come to us, but some way of having something as a very basic document, and it would be an in-camera document, hopefully provided. And I know there's been many a night we've sat here and our media staff have, you know, gone back and huddled and come forward with a document for us. Is there some way of something basic being brought forward than whatever is verbally discussed in camera, if a more comprehensive report has to be put together that's in camera that covers off the discussions? Would that be more how we're leaning towards looking at sort of the verbal updates?
Through the chair. So one of the things that that I've observed as well is, because I have looked at some of the investigations for closed session meetings that we've had, is that I think we can definitely take a look at the way we're documenting our closed session minutes and to potentially put a little bit more information in there than we currently have. I think that would satisfy the ombudsman, and it would also satisfy what you're looking for in here as well.
Thank you, because I think that was the concern as well, and I understand both. Is that walking something on, do we know for sure that we should be going in camera or not? Because we have the right to question that, as Councillor Clark has said. But having a record, as Chair Wilson has mentioned, is that she's gone back to try and find something, but there's no record of it. So this would address that if we did have a report that, whether it was there when we verbally got the information because of time sensitivity, and it was prepared immediately following, but there was a record of conversation and information provided at that specific meeting. Correct, Madam Clerk?
Through the chair, yes. So we've been working with, clerk staff have been working with all the report authors or anybody who's coming to committee, and I find that they have started using the information-only report a lot more often when they are just bringing information forward. You'll notice the city manager, Smith, when she's been bringing information about the task force, she's been using an information report. It's to provide updates on what's going on at the task force, and those are coming in camera as well.
Okay, thank you for that information.
And certainly I would expect that staff at any time when they do have the time to produce a document before we go into close, that will be done.
Thank you for that.
Leave your microphone on. I'm going to turn,
I'm sorry.
I'm going to turn the chair over to you, Councillor Pierson. I just want to make some comments also. And so I have two comments. I have trouble with this motion for two reasons. Number one is the time. And quite often the council will want to ask questions and they'll say, well, we can only do that in camera, which sometimes could be the advice of the city solicitor. And so we go right into closed session and get an update. And to allow us to either respond to issues externally or come back into the public session to make a more informed decision by having that. The second part is, I recall most of the verbal updates we get is on labor negotiations. And quite often, the lead negotiator is just come out that day of a negotiation, because we're getting near an HSR strike or whatever it may be, and he gets up there and gives us an update on it. It's recorded in the minutes, so it's not like it's a big secret, but it would really delay by up to 2 weeks in getting that information on the update labor negotiations to give us a comfort level on how that's going. Because that is the main issue, dealing with timeliness. The other concern I have, and I'm going to be blunt about this, is leaks. Shadow Creek had very comprehensive in-camera reports, and they got leaked. Could you imagine if the labor negotiation updates were handed over by a union-friendly member of council to the union, and then they get a full update on where we're at? And those things are very confidential because it can impair how collective agreements are negotiated and could be very costly to the city if that started to happen. But it's been proven to me somebody's leaking documents. We don't know who, but what's to stop a member of council to leaking it to the union leader and really influencing how our negotiations are going? So I like those being verbal because they're not finalized. It's an update and it's kept confidential and it's in here. I'm not sure what the Shadow Creek issues were that were not get a written document, because the reports I saw were very comprehensive on that particular topic. And of course, the media have those now. And, I'm hearing member council say, well, just a very basic report. Well, that sounds like the whole issue around conflict of interest. That's very subjective. What Brad thinks is basic and what I think is basic could be entirely different. And so what's enough information? And I'm going to suggest to you that maybe 11.2 will fix this problem. If Brad's motion carries, we'll start to record these in-camera minutes, and then we got a record that are available. And so at this time, based on the information I have, I can't support 11.1 for the two reasons: time and the potential of leaks, particularly of union negotiations. And I'll take the chair back and Go on to Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair Ferguson, and I appreciate the comments of my colleagues. I find the labor relations one a bit of a non sequitur because they don't come in and say it's a verbal update. They actually tell us that they're giving us an update about labor negotiations on QP such and such, on whatever. So there is a very clear indication to council why they're wishing to go in camera. So there would be no reason why not to make that determination. And that's all I'm talking about. I mean, I find it fascinating that as a councillor, if I wish to add a motion to the agenda, I'm required to send it by email to the clerk. So it's a one-pager. I don't understand why staff can't do the exact same thing and send to the clerk, here's what we need to talk about in camera, and that information is then shared with the council in camera. It doesn't have to be the fulsome report if it's a verbal update, but there has to be something that we can sink our teeth into as to why we're going in camera. So I know I'm parsing two different issues. I know Councillor Wilson's motion is everything should have that. My concern is on the in-camera stuff that I think was the Shadok, two of the reports for the Shadok. So I continue to have that. I agree with Councillor Ferguson. If my motion passes, which I'm not sure it's going to, it would resolve all of those issues. And so I don't want to mix the two motions together. But I think we do need some type of practice or policy with regards to verbal updates.
Okay, I have no more speakers this time, so it's been duly. You asking to come back on again? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I feel a little bit hems.
I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Clerk.
Do you need to speak before me, Clerk Holland, or after?
Well, it depends if you were wrapping up.
I think I am wrapping up. I'm a little bit hamstrung, I think, because I don't want to go into the waters of Shadok, and I don't know how else to respond in full. So I will have to parse my comments by saying, I think, the very least that the public should have access to is, on your point, Councillor, that there are some things that happen very immediately, and at the table, staff or members of council will ask that evening or that afternoon, I would like an update on, or staff that moment find out we need to give our elected body an update on, and it's very immediate. On the matter of Shadok, there in fact is no record of saying what action drove what. I think at the very least we need to have a record of, did council ask for an update? Did staff bring an update? There is no record. I don't think that is in the public's interest. So
We did get updates. We got an update in January, we got an update in September. And so there was updates that did come back to council.
I appreciate that. My reference is to the previous council, sir.
Well, there was,
And this is where I am feeling a little, the question was posed to me at the beginning of this discussion about councillor. What prompted this? I responded to the best of my ability, but I am not able to respond to the fullest of my ability. So my intentions are, I think, honest and good, and that is there are occasions that I have come across in my own due diligence as a newly elected member where I was precluded from understanding the full sum of an issue because there was no record of it at all. And that's all I feel comfortable saying. Thank you.
okay. Councillor Pierson, you just take the floor again for a second. If you're referring to the previous council, there was a July 18 where it came to us immediately that this had happened and that there would be an update later, and which happened in January with the new council. That's all I can recall, and but I think that the minutes should reflect that. And I don't know whether mover has seen those minutes, or is even entitled to, because you're a citizen then, you weren't a member of council. And I know how this would change that if in fact it was reflected in the minutes. I'm just worried we're swatting a fly with a baseball bat. And we're gonna hamstring ourselves a lot. And most importantly, the whole leak thing really concerns me. And how that happened, and what else is gonna be leaked in the future. And so maybe we need to put less on paper instead of more to prevent that from happening. So I'll take the chair back. I have no other speakers, so we'll put the vote then. I gotta keep looking up. Go ahead.
Sorry, yep.
Through the chair. I just want to bring to light that the official record of committee and council are the minutes and the approved minutes and the motions that are within there. And that's why it's absolutely important to my team that we are documenting those decisions of committee and council correctly, and that staff can read those minutes to make sure that they understand what their directions are from committee and council. That's a role that my staff take very seriously, and I think they do a very good job of that. Since I've started here, I am working with SLT on the agenda management to try and help shape how we're bringing information forward to council. And within that, I would like to have the discussion with them around verbal updates as well. I do have a little bit of concern about putting a hard and fast policy in place, because there's always a gray area where we need to bring timely information to committee or council for decision and deliberation. And I'll leave that with you. Thank you.
Councillor Pierson.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Chair. So I'm hearing what the clerk is saying, and I agree with Councillor Ferguson's comments with regards to the following motion that we're going to be dealing with, and appreciate what Madam Clerk is pursuing through SLT. I'm just wondering if maybe when we get the next motion, if it's supported, that this won't assist with information that we hold off. I'd rather hold off and find out exactly what SLT can come back with and how they can address this. As I just want to be careful we're not creating a lot of work for staff. If it's just a matter of a one-page report, but that has to go to, and maybe it could be added direction to the clerk to come back and explain how this could be done, then I could support this. Because then that would be the clerk investigating and dealing with all the departments, because SLT is representatives from all the departments, on how they could come back with a report, a sort of a blanket summary. That could be an in-camera report that we get before the in-camera meeting of what we're going to be talking about.
Okay, I suspect you would have to do a refer back to staff then.
Well, and or an amendment to the motion that we direct the clerk to investigate how this can be done.
That'd be changed in the text of the motion too much.
Correct, I understand.
You'd have to either refer it back or let the vote fail and then put a different motion up, so it's up to you. Madam Clerk.
Through the chair. So this is something that we are currently working on with SLT. We've had already one meeting on the other business listings as well. So there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than just verbal updates that are coming back. There are a lot of different practices that I'm working through with SLT. And I'm certainly hoping that you are going to start seeing changes moving forward in 2020. And I'm not going to need a direction from you for every single thing we're working on, but I'll leave that with committee.
Okay, so I see there's no,
Okay, sorry.
Councillor Pierson.
If, and with all due indulgence, and I appreciate what the mover of the motion's intent is, and I think we're still following the intent, but I would move that we refer this to the clerk for the further review with SLT, recognizing the work that is being done currently, and that a report, public report, come forward that can address the request here.
It comes back to a future governance committee.
Governance committee meeting.
Okay, is there a seconder to that motion? Second by Councillor Clark. So we have a referral motion, which is not debatable. Do you have anything else you want to add, Madam Clerk?
Sorry, I'm just wondering what, so you moved and seconded the second one, but now you're making an amendment? Or are you just referring
A
it back?
referral motion, refer it back to you.
Okay, all right.
Report, because I don't want it to die on the floor.
Right.
Say, allow the opportunity to bring us back how you see this being implemented through SLT that meets the guideline of what the mover wants.
Okay, I'd be happy to bring an update report back later.
Okay, to governance.
Okay, so there's no further discussion on a referral motion, so all in favor, is this electronic vote, Madam Clerk? All in favor? This is to the referral. Next carries unanimously. Turn the chair back to you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. I'm going to go to Councillor Clark now for a motion of 11.2 is recording of in-camera sessions. Councillor Clark, could you please introduce your motion?
Thank you, Chair Wilson. It's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Maria Pierson. Recording of in-camera meetings, whereas the Ontario Ombudsman recommends that all municipalities make audio recordings or video recordings of all meetings, both open and closed, to ensure a thorough record. Whereas there are now 23 Ontario municipalities that have implemented either audio or audio-visual recordings of their closed meetings. Whereas an audio or an audio-visual recording of an in-camera meeting provides a clear and accessible record for closed meeting investigators to review. Whereas such recordings of closed meetings will assist the municipality in quickly demonstrating that council and staff did not stray from the legislated requirements during closed meetings, and whereas such recordings of closed meetings will provide a complete record to be used by the municipality and/or councillors for future references as needed, therefore be it resolved that the city manager be directed to report back to the Governance Review Subcommittee within 30 days on the costs and policies to implement an audio or audio-visual recording system to be utilized for the recording of an in-camera meetings and the ways and means for the city clerk to archive and protect such records. And I'm open to the timing because I realize that 30 days is likely a little bit tight. If I can speak to it very quickly. So this was originally a motion that was properly tabled at a General Issues Committee meeting or council meeting. I can't really recall which one it was. It was referred to the Governance Committee, which is akin to exactly what happened to 11.1, so I didn't have any difficulties in that. There's two aspects to why I think we should be doing this. One, I think it really does clearly provide a record to the Ombudsman if there's an investigation request. They can watch or listen to the tape, hear very clearly what was transpired, and they can very quickly make a determination that we stayed within the legislative requirements of the closed meetings legislation. With respect to the other aspect that I'm finding that occurs on occasion, and I'm going to point to I think it was the General Issues Committee meeting recently where we made determination about where the funding should be going to on provincial highways. So if you review your minutes, there was an error in the minutes with the resolution. We indicated that we wanted the province, we didn't want our $1 billion to be utilized for provincial highways. A friendly amendment was proposed to include other transportation projects, and it wasn't captured in the minutes or in the resolution. So by memory, we recalled this occurred. We consulted with the clerks. Councillor Danko raised the matter. It's interesting because the clerk referred back to the tape to verify what was said. And that's how we came to determination what should be in the resolution. And I think that act in the last 24 hours proves the validity of the need for the very least an audio recording as to what happens in camera. Because when councillors, when we now leave here and we're now reviewing the minutes, or we're moving down the road and there's another report and we say, no, we directed staff to do this and we're going by memory, currently in our in-camera process, there is no record to validate the veracity of the statement that the councillor is questioning. We're going by memory and what's in the minutes. And the minutes, as you know, are sparse in an in-camera session. So at the very least, I would argue, regardless of the issues with in-camera meetings and the Ombudsman, there should be a recording of what transpires in camera so that if we need to validate the veracity of a position or direction to staff in the future, and that could happen 6 months after the event, that we have a record to go back to say, yes, that's what has transpired. So I think it's a prudent thing to do. I don't think we need to do the audio-visual, which is probably likely much more expensive, but an audio recording is likely the least expensive. It can be archived relatively easily. And I think it really does resolve that issue. And I dare say there isn't anyone in this room that doesn't recognize what I just talked about, which has happened in the last 24 hours, because we've seen it happen. In the middle of a meeting, there's push and shove, there's friendly amendments, we give direction, and the clerks are trying to capture that direction. And human error does happen. And there is no way to verify direction if there's no recording. We get into these disputes. That's not what was said. I disagree. I made the motion. No, that's not what you said. And we're in a dispute between councilors, and there's no record to clear it up. So I would argue, with the greatest respect to everyone, that an audio recording of in-camera meetings would eliminate that. It's the least expensive way to go. It can be archived relatively cheaply. And the bonus to it is if we do get an inquiry about an in-camera session, the ombudsman simply has to listen to the tape as opposed to calling in a dozen witnesses from the meeting, because we've all been called in to testify. I'm using the word testify, but we're answering questions to the ombudsman. And the last one, it took up 20 minutes of my time to answer questions as to what I recall happened in an in-camera meeting. And it's my recollection versus Councillor Pierson's recollection versus Councillor Ferguson's recollection. And if we play that telephone game, we all have slightly different recollections as to what was said. And then the ombudsman makes the decision. This eliminates all of that. So I leave it to my colleagues to contemplate. Happy to make some amendments to it to broaden the time frame. And I really believe that we can eliminate the audio-visual aspect of it, just do the audio recording, which is likely the least expensive of all of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, or Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Clark, for bringing this forward. And I know there's been some apprehension because we've tried to address this several times as the council, previous councils back, and you know, there's been trepidation. But recognizing, and I seconded this, and I know Councillor Clark said, well, you just seconded it whether you support it or not. But I am supporting this moving forward, and I think I'm going to explain that my reason for supporting this is that technology has come a long way. We are currently, and I don't have it, but I know that we can even get our in-camera reports now on our iPads. We couldn't do that in the past. So as I said, technology has changed. I too recall several calls that I've received from the Ombudsman's office asking for clarification of my recollection of what happened on a couple of in-camera issues over the last number of years. And it is time-consuming. It's time-consuming of scheduling the timing for them to call, blocking that time off so you can sit and answer all of the questions. And then certainly you're only supplying what you recollect, and the Ombudsman has to put all of this together. I can't imagine what the timeline is for the Ombudsman now to sit and factor in every single bit of conversation that's received from everyone that responded. Now it would be a matter of just saying, okay, just pull up that tape, and it's all confidential still. Just pull up the tape, and the Ombudsman can hear it right from the horse's mouth. There's no if, and, or buts. The questions would be answered immediately. I think it's much more efficient. I think it protects all of us, staff, councillors around this table, and certainly keeps a historical record of what goes on. I agree that it should potentially just be audio, because I think that's all that should be needed in camera. And I don't have a problem if Councillor Clark wants to extend the time period, because I just want to ask, if I can, through you, Madam Chair, whether, is this report coming to us tonight? Is this report from GIC or from governance being walked on this evening? Or if this has to go to GIC for ratification, correct? So that's another week or so?
Sorry, through the chair, you're going to AFNA.
It goes to AFNA, sorry. So it goes to next Friday or something, right? And then from there to council, so it'll be into March before it could be addressed. And the 30 days would start from then, from ratification at council.
Through the chair, yes, after council. I just have one question of clarification, if I could ask, through the chair. Within the motion, you're talking about the costs and policies to implement. Are you asking staff to develop those policies or just to give highlights of what those policies would be? Because the motion isn't actually approving recording, it's asking us to come back with the costs and policies.
Recognizing that Councillor Pierson still
Sorry, I
has the
still,
floor.
yeah. Sorry, I'll let Councillor Clark to have that clarification. But the one last thing I want to ask, and maybe this wasn't really answered, it's just my position on this, is that you will recall that we've had very, very late meetings that go into 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. And at the end of that time, I don't know about anyone else around this table, but it's very difficult to remember exactly what was said verbatim. And, you know, and it seems like we seem to get ourselves in that position more and more. So a recording would certainly make it much more clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I give the floor to Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Clark, did you wish to give that clarification now or at the end? Okay, thank you. Councillor Ferguson?
Thank you. Through you to Solicitor Nicole. Will there be a firewall with this tape? Can, you know, we get into some pretty heavy-duty discussions on LPAT hearings, on litigation that's happening, and so can these tapes then be subpoenaed by a prosecuting attorney or an LPAT board member? And would we be required to hand them over, or are they firewall protected?
Clerk Hall? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so through the chair. So I think that's one of the policies and part of the review that we would need to conduct in terms of the report coming back. That information would be provided in that report.
So that's part of the deliberation. I think I'm hearing the solicitors say that would have to guide the policy.
I would doubt, isn't it, that you could, if court ordered you to release these tapes into a hearing, could we tell the courts no?
Through the chair, if it was a court order, no. In terms of a court, LPATs are a little different. It would depend on the exact situation. But there certainly could be a situation where those are then released to the court if it's a direct order of the court.
Okay. You know, I like the idea of having I find those tapes very handy myself, and I think that they would be useful. I know some members of council are very uneasy about this. I know one member of council to this day won't turn his microphone on when we're in camera because he wants to talk openly rather than having something that could potentially be replayed back at a later date because he wants to be, sorry, but that's very open on their particular feelings. And so I think that will come back and report. I don't know how they can get back 30 days, but it sounds like Councillor Clark is amenable to changing that to a little longer time so we can get this right. But so I'll support it this time, but I'd like a lot of information whether when we discuss something in camera, is that going to be public in the courtroom or in an LPAT hearing later on?
Councillor Clark.
Thank you. So I'm going to suggest that we transpose the 30 to 90 days, which is 3 months after the decision is made. I'm going to suggest that it's the costs and policies, and I'd leave it as policies. It's not highlights, but it's basically the policies that you would be utilizing to implement this. And so, and I think a part of that would go to the city solicitors' discussions, because I think there needs to be review of court decisions with regards to, has this ever happened? When we have solicitor-client legal advice for documentation, they can subpoena all they want. They're not getting the records. No judge is going to ask you to hand over those records. We know that to be the fact. But there's nothing stopping them from asking staff to appear as witnesses as opposed to the lawyer, and that has occurred. So we need to have clarification in terms of what are the limitations for staff appearing before that type of a hearing, not specifically LPAT, Mazzotti, but specifically judicial reviews, for example. Because I know for a fact that in licensing tribunals, we have deliberations in camera in a licensing tribunal. But Councillor Whitehead has been subpoenaed to appear before a judge for judicial reviews of those decisions. And he has to answer those questions. He can't say no. So that already exists, whether or not we have a record or not. So we need to have a clear understanding of that. I think the other change is to just eliminate the audio-visual, so it's an audio recording system. The reason I'm suggesting that is to Councillor Whitehead's point. He used the terminology firewall, which I think he was specifically mentioning the firewall legally. Sorry, what did I call you? Whitehead. Yeah, you don't even look like him, do you? You got better hair. Councillor Ferguson mentioned that it's parted the right way, which goes to another. Anyways, back on track. Councillor Ferguson mentioned the firewalling, which I think was specific to the legal component of it. But in my mind, I'm looking at the firewalling in terms of the digital recording. So I'm not talking about a tape recording. We're talking about a digital recording that can then be archived and firewalled to ensure no one can gain access to it except the clerk. So that's why there needs to be policies around the record keeping on that type of documentation, in my opinion. And so I think that would go to the policy side also. I'll just end up repeating myself, but I think it's a prudent thing that should move forward and be investigated and come back. I think at the end of the day, the audio recording, and Councillor Pierson was 100% correct. I think the one meeting we were 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning? 3:10 a.m. And I'm not objecting to the long hours that we put in as a council, but I do know that if we're starting at 7:30 in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, and we're not finishing until 3:10, and we're making decisions, our recollection of that time frame in the last few hours and decisions may be at the very least fuzzy, not just for council, but for everybody. And so having that audio recording, I think, is the most crucial component to ensure that the direction that we gave is followed. So I'll make those friendly amendments, so it would be 90 days. I would delete the terminology audio-visual and leave the rest, and I see the clerk would like to speak. Thank you, and the seconder agrees with the amendment.
Clerk Holland?
Through the chair, I just want to clarify, so you're looking for staff to provide you with information if council chooses, correct? You're not looking for a recommendation report from staff?
No, I'm recommending that we want to see what the costs are and the policies to implement it.
Right, and we'll come back with that information.
And then once we see that, then council can make the determination whether or not they wish to proceed. I'm not
Correct.
suggesting that we're directing you to do it. Let's get that information and then make the determination.
Correct. Okay, I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
That makes sense, right? Thank you, Chair Wilson.
So it has been moved by Councillor Clark, and it has been seconded by Councillor Pierson. So we need to vote on that, the motion that is before us. All in favor or opposed, please? The motion carries 4-0. Okay, we are on to, thank you all, notices of motion. Are there any? Clerk Angela? General information or other business. Are there any items of general information? I don't see any. May I have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Pierson. Thank you. We are adjourned.